When it comes to comparing the greatest players of all time, we NBA fans love using numbers. Numbers, numbers, and more numbers. It seems like players every day are setting new statistical records, and players like LeBron James are climbing up the all-time lists on a weekly basis. We know the names who sit atop the NBA's all-time lists. For example, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar sits atop the all-time scoring list with 38,387 points. Now, does that make him the greatest scorer of all time? Well, that simply depends on how you look at it. Kareem played 20 seasons of NBA basketball, while guys like Wilt Chamberlain and Michael Jordan played significantly less. Although Kareem is on top of the all-time list, Michael Jordan has the highest scoring average of all time at 30.1 points per game, while Wilt Chamberlain has the highest single-season average at 50.4 points per game. This is a very basic example of how a player like Kareem can be seen as the king of scoring, even if he wasn't scoring the most points when they played. This is one way that all-time lists can be a little bit misleading when seeing who ranks where. Now let me make this clear. I'm not saying this as a criticism to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. To his credit, he became the all-time leading scorer by being a great scorer, having a long career, being extremely reliable, and while being very durable and missing very few games due to injury. Those things are all to his credit. All I'm saying is that to simply call him the greatest scorer because he has the most points might be a little too simplistic and lacks context overall. Here's a couple other examples of the power of longevity. Isaiah Thomas is one of the top 5 greatest point guards of NBA history. Some would go even as far as saying he's the second greatest point guard ever behind Magic Johnson. The original IT was a leader, a big game performer, a fantastic scorer, and an all-time great facilitator. But even with that being said, guess which guard has many career totals even more impressive than Isaiah Thomas? That's right, you guessed it, Jason Terry. One player is an all-time great, while the other is a long-lasting role player. NBA fans would agree that these players aren't even in the same stratosphere, but the all-time rankings would indicate otherwise. Here's something to ponder. Would you rather have a player who averaged 15 points per game over the course of 20 seasons, or would you rather have a player who averaged 30 points per game over 10 seasons? Technically, they're going to end up on the same spot of the all-time scoring list, but I personally would rather have 30 for 10 seasons. That's a next-level player whose doubled production is going to give me that much greater of a chance at winning a championship in those 10 years. Here's another example. Say a player averaged 24 points and 10 rebounds over his career and played for roughly 10 seasons in the league. And then you have a player who averaged around 12 points and 8 rebounds in roughly 20 seasons in the league. Technically, these players will have similar career numbers and have roughly the same level of production over the totality of their careers when it's all said and done. Except the first player is Larry Bird, and the second player is Kevin Willis. Although they have similar career totals, one player is viewed as a top 10 great of NBA history and was one of the baddest dudes during his era and helped define a decade of NBA basketball, while the other player was a decent rotation piece for 20 years. Do you see the difference? Another reason why all-time stats can be misleading is because it gives an unfair advantage to the more modern players. Longevity is more of a recent trend. The reality is, players' careers are increasing in length over time. Of the first round of the 1970 NBA draft, the players selected played for an average of 6.4 years. In the 1980 draft, they played for an average of 7 years. In the 1990 draft, they played for an average of 8.4 years. And in 2000, they played for an average of 9 years. Obviously, I can't gather data from any later decades because many of those players are still active, but I guarantee you that their average careers would be even longer. But wait, there's more. The NBA has been around for 73 years, meaning the halfway point of the league was 1983. So there's the first half of the NBA before 1983, and there's the second half of the NBA after 1983. Of the top 50 players of all time in most games played, 40 out of the 50 players were drafted after 1983. There is indisputable evidence that NBA players' careers are consistently getting longer. But why exactly is this? Well, there's a lot of contributing factors, actually. Modern players have nicer hotels, better fitness programs, private jets, personal trainers, they play in more comfortable shoes, they have more advanced doctors and surgeons, and generally more money for everything else I'm forgetting. Those are luxuries that players of the 60s, 70s, and 80s would have loved to have had working in their favor to extend their careers and improve their athleticism. So does all of this mean that they were not as good on the court? No, of course not. It just means that they didn't last as long because they had less available to them. Obviously, I'm not saying that longevity isn't important or that it's a non-factor. A player who's able to perform to a high standard consistently over a long period of time deserves a ton of respect for it. But is it the most important aspect when comparing players? Is it the determining factor when we assess a player's standing among the all-time greats? I personally don't think it should be, based on my arguments in this video. In my opinion, having the greatest resume of all time and being the greatest player of all time are two separate things. When I'm talking about the greatest player of all time, actually, scratch that. When I'm talking about the greatest players of all time, I don't care nearly as much about their career totals because that isn't an accurate assessment of how dominant they were of a ball player. What I care more about is how dominant they were when they were at their peak. When they were on the mountaintop, how far did they stand out from the rest of the competition? Longevity doesn't tell me that, but context does. With that being said, I'm planning a future video that will compare the greatest players ever using only the 10 best years of their career. It will be interesting to see how history changes and which players stand out when everyone plays for an equal amount of time. This video will obviously require a lot of research in the meantime, but it's coming, so stay tuned for that one. Let me know in the comments section how important longevity is when ranking the all-time greats. I look forward to talking with you guys in the comments section about this one. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.